Welcome back to Cozy Side Audio. Tonight's story is soft, slow, and written from the heart. Perfect for those quiet hours. If it touches you, please like, share it with someone special, and subscribe for more gentle moments. Let's begin the story. Cozy Side Audio presents Finding the Sound. Chapter 1, Mirror Notes. The reflection staring back at Sophie Hall wasn't what she wanted to see. Her lips were parted, throat tight, the faintest rasp of a note clinging to the back of her tongue, as if afraid to come out. A soft hum spilled into the cramped bedroom, bouncing against pale blue walls plastered with posters that had been curling at the corners for years. Fragments of artists she'd once idolized, singers who had made their way from obscurity to stadiums. On the mirror taped to her closet door, ring lights left a halo glare, surrounding her reflection like a spotlight she didn't deserve. Again, she whispered to herself. Her voice broke halfway through the line. The note wasn't awful. It wasn't flat, not exactly. But it wasn't what she'd hoped either. Sophie pressed her palm against the glass, leaving smudges over her own face. Every practice session ended like this. A tiny victory tangled with a disappointment too sharp for her to ignore. The truth was simple and painful. At 19, Sophie Hall had been singing for years, writing lyrics in secret journals, uploading covers and originals to her tiny YouTube channel. And yet, 2,000, maybe 3,000 subscribers. A number that felt both real and fake. Real when she scrolled through the comments from strangers telling her she had something special. Fake when she saw what her peers were doing. People her age filling venues, racking up streams in the millions, signing record deals. Her numbers didn't scream career, they whispered hobby. She turned away from the mirror, pacing the small space of her room. Her bed was messy, sheets in a half-fold from the night before. Her keyboard was shoved under the desk, wires snaking like veins toward her battered laptop. A cheap microphone sat perched on a stand. Her portal to the world, her one fragile lifeline to possibility. She sank onto the edge of the mattress and buried her face in her hands. It wasn't that she couldn't sing. Sophie knew she could. Her pitch was steady, her range decent, her tone something people described as warm but fragile. The problem was that nothing fit. Pop tracks swallowed her voice. Acoustic ballads made her sound too plain. She'd tried R&B, indie, folk, even a weird experimental rap collab once, and nothing seemed to land. Every genre felt like she was borrowing someone else's clothes, always tugging at the sleeves, never comfortable. Why can't I just fit somewhere? She muttered into her palms. Her phone buzzed on the comforter. She reached for it without enthusiasm. A notification from Instagram. Sings Like Angela had uploaded a new reel. Sophie tapped on it despite herself. A girl, no older than 20, sat in her car belting out a pop song with flawless ease. The caption read, "Can't believe I hit 100K followers today. Thank you everyone for listening to my heart." Sophie's chest tightened. She clicked away, scrolling back to her own profile. At Soph Sings, her grid was neat enough. Clips of covers, a few messy originals, practice takes where she laughed at herself. Likes hovered around 100, maybe 200 if she was lucky. Comments were sweet but sparse. Underrated. You deserve more views. This is so pretty. Words that kept her going but didn't build a career. She locked her phone and tossed it aside. Tomorrow is another contest, the 4th one this month. She hated contests. They weren't about the music. Not really, they were about image, charisma, how well you could stand out in 3 minutes flat, while judges scribbled notes behind polished desks. Sophie had never made it past the first round. Still, she entered every time. Not because she believed she'd win, but because what else was there? Her mom had stopped asking about them weeks ago. "You'll get it one day," she'd said gently after Sophie's last loss, her voice half proud, half concerned. Her dad never mentioned her music at all anymore. He loved her, Sophie knew that. But when he walked past her room and heard her recording, the silence he left in his wake was louder than any applause. The house felt small tonight. Her little brother was downstairs playing video games, his laughter punching through the thin walls. The smell of microwave popcorn drifted up, clinging to her hoodie. Sophie lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. She thought about quitting, like she always did at this point in the night. The thought sat heavy in her chest, threatening to suffocate her. If she quit, life would be simpler. No more contests, no more shaky recordings, no more late nights editing clips that barely got 100 views. She could go to community college, get a degree, find a job, let the dream rot quietly in the corner of her heart. But then she remembered the first time she'd ever sung in front of anyone. 8th grade, a school talent show. She'd been shaking so badly she thought she'd faint, but she'd walked on stage, clutched the mic, and let out the first verse of a Taylor Swift cover. For the first time in her life, the noise of the world had gone silent. Just her, and her voice, and a room full of listening hearts. The applause afterward was messy and scattered, but to Sophie it had felt like a cathedral bell ringing inside her chest. She couldn't forget that. She couldn't throw it away. So she sat up, wiped her face with her sleeve, and reached for the microphone. Her laptop glowed to life, the DAW already open. She clicked record and let the instrumental of her newest original play. It was soft, a piano progression she'd looped the night before. Her lyrics, scribbled in a notebook with half the words crossed out, rested on her desk. She cleared her throat, pressed her headphones tighter, and began. The first take was shaky, the second was better. By the 5th, she was losing track of her own voice, every note bleeding into the next. She pulled off the headphones, frustrated, and slammed them onto the desk. But just before she shut the whole thing down, she played back the last take. And there it was. A moment. A shimmer. Just 2 lines. Barely 10 seconds. But something about the way her voice had cracked, then steadied like it was fighting to stand tall, felt right. Her heart skipped. For the first time that night, Sophie smiled. The next morning, she woke to the sound of her alarm blaring at 8:30. Contest day. Her stomach was already in knots. She slipped into jeans and a black top, tied her hair back in a messy bun, and layered on just enough makeup to look awake. Her mom gave her a quick, "Good luck" at the door. Her brother didn't look up from his game. Sophie walked the 2 blocks to the bus stop, headphones blasting her latest playlist of hopeful songs. The contest was held in a rented community center downtown. Rows of plastic chairs filled with nervous teenagers and 20-somethings lined the waiting area. Sophie signed in, got a sticker with her contestant number, and sat in the corner with her water bottle. She scanned the room. Everyone looked so confident, laughing with friends, warming up their voices like professionals. She felt small. When her number was called, her legs trembled all the way to the stage. The judges looked up, 3 of them, arms crossed, pens ready. Sophie introduced herself, took a shaky breath, and began. Her song was short, an original ballad. She sang it soft, steady, her eyes closed half the time to block out the world. By the time she finished, silence hung in the air for half a second, then polite applause. The judges scribbled, whispered, nodded. And that was it. She walked off stage, throat dry. An hour later, they posted the results. Sophie scanned the list of names. Hers wasn't there. Again. She left before the winners were announced. The bus ride home was long and quiet. She pressed her forehead to the window, watching the world blur by. Every rejection carved another crack into her chest, but she kept telling herself the same thing. One day, someone will hear me. One day, it'll matter. When she got home, she didn't even bother to eat dinner. She threw her hoodie on the chair, pulled up her email, and uploaded the clip she'd recorded the night before to her tiny channel. She didn't expect much. She never did. But hours later, just before midnight, her phone buzzed with a new notification. A direct message from someone called Foster. Chapter 2. Failed Spotlight. The sound of rejection wasn't always silence. Sometimes it was applause that didn't reach your heart. Sophie sat in the hard plastic chair at the back of the auditorium, her water bottle sweating against her palm. Contestants shifted nervously beside her, some whispering to each other, some scrolling through their phones as if waiting in a doctor's office. Her number, 47, was still pinned to her shirt. The paper crinkled every time she moved, as though mocking her for being just another face in a sea of hopefuls. She hated these places. The community center auditorium smelled faintly of coffee, hairspray, and dust. The overhead lights were too bright, washing everyone out to a pale shade of beige. The judges sat in the front row behind a long folding table, papers stacked neatly, microphones clipped to their shirts. They were efficient, detached, people who could smile warmly at a singer one minute and shake their heads the next, unbothered by the tiny heartbreaks they handed out in bulk. It was Sophie's third contest this month. She hadn't wanted to come, but she also couldn't bear the thought of skipping it. Every no stung, but every missed chance felt worse, like she'd be closing a door that might have led somewhere. When her name was called, her stomach lurched. She stood, smoothed down her jeans, and walked onto the stage. The microphone stood tall, cold in her hand. She looked out into the darkened room. A handful of parents and friends dotted the back rows, their polite claps echoing like hollow encouragement. Sophie's heart raced so fast she felt lightheaded. "I'm Sophie Hall," she said softly, her voice barely carrying. "I'll be singing an original." One judge raised their brows, scribbling something. Original songs always carried a double edge. Brave if they were good, risky if they weren't. The piano track started. She had submitted it on a USB drive earlier, and Sophie drew a breath. The opening notes of her song filled the room, simple and wistful, and she began to sing. Her voice trembled at first, but she steadied it, gripping the mic tighter. She closed her eyes halfway through, as she always did, and let the words spill. It wasn't her best performance. Her throat was dry, her legs stiff. But there was a moment, just a moment, where she reached the chorus and something clicked, the notes soaring just right. For a breath of time, Sophie felt like she wasn't auditioning, wasn't begging. She was simply singing. The last note hung in the air and dissolved. She opened her eyes. The applause was polite, scattered. The judges scribbled again. One nodded faintly. "Thank you, Sophie," said the woman in the middle, smiling thinly. And that was it. She walked off stage with her heart in her shoes. Back in her chair, Sophie stared at her water bottle until the results were posted. The list of advancing contestants appeared on a bulletin board by the entrance. People crowded around it, gasps and cheers erupting as names were spotted. Sophie pushed through the bodies, scanning the sheet. Not there. Again. She stepped back, the room suddenly too small, the air too heavy. Her throat ached, her chest buzzing with embarrassment. She shoved her way outside into the sunlight, where the cool air smacked her cheeks like reality. Her mom had driven her, waiting in the car with a book. When Sophie slid into the passenger seat, she didn't have to say anything. Her mom closed the book, looked at her daughter's face, and sighed. "Next time," she said gently. Sophie nodded. Yeah, but the word felt hollow. The ride home was quiet, filled only with the hum of traffic. Sophie leaned against the window, her reflection blurring in the glass. She thought of the girl who had gone viral last week for singing a cover in her kitchen, or the guy on TikTok whose goofy mashups had landed him a record deal. Everywhere she looked, people were making it. Strangers with voices no better than hers were exploding overnight. Why not her? When they got home, Sophie went straight to her room. She dropped her bag, kicked off her shoes, and sat cross-legged on the floor. The contest sticker still clung to her shirt. She ripped it off and crumpled it, tossing it toward the trash can. It missed, lying like a dead thing on the carpet. Her phone buzzed. Instagram notification. Another singer posting their highlight reel. Sophie swiped away, not ready to look. Instead, she opened her laptop and scrolled to her YouTube channel, at Soph Sings. Her latest video, a cover of a Halsey song, sat at 223 views. 5 comments. 1 from her best friend Emily. "You sound amazing, babe." 2 from strangers and 2 spam bots linking to sketchy promotion sites. She rested her chin on her knees. Was this all it would ever be? She thought about the hours she spent hunched over her keyboard, writing lyrics that might never be heard. The nights recording take after take until her throat burned, only to pick the least bad version to upload. The dream felt bigger than her, like a stage she wasn't allowed to step on. but then her eyes drifted to the notebook on her desk. Lyrics scrawled in messy handwriting, margins full of doodles and scratched-out words. Her songs weren't perfect, but they were hers. And maybe, just maybe, that was reason enough to keep trying. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. Quitting whispered to her again, soft and tempting, but she couldn't. She remembered the shimmer from last night's recording session, the way her voice had cracked and then steadied, how it had felt raw and true. She gave up. No one would ever hear that. Sophie closed her eyes and made herself a promise. One more contest. Just one more. She'd enter next week's and give it everything she had. If she failed again... She didn't know. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She picked it up without thinking. A notification. New message request. Foster, .wav. Chapter 3. Lonely Echoes. The house was quiet in the way that made Sophie's skin crawl. Her mom had gone to bed early. Her brother was asleep with his console still glowing faintly in the living room, and the whole street outside her window was wrapped in stillness. Only the faint buzz of her laptop fan and the hum of the mini fridge filled the silence. Sophie sat on the edge of her bed, legs tucked beneath her, the glow of her phone painting her face. Her inbox was empty. Again. No new emails about collabs, no replies from the handful of producers she'd messaged last week. No, "We'd love to feature you" subject lines blinking like a lifeline. Just spam offers to buy promo packages and a newsletter from a music gear store she couldn't afford. She tossed her phone aside and exhaled hard. This was the part of the dream no one talked about. The lonely trenches, where you fought not against competition but against yourself. Nights where she wondered if she was delusional, clinging to a fantasy that wasn't meant for her. She leaned back, staring up at the ceiling. A poster of Florence Welch hung above her bed, tacked up years ago, edges curling now. Sophie remembered being 16, staring at that same poster after a long day at school, promising herself that she'd find her sound, her stage. 3 years later, the poster looked the same. She didn't. High school hadn't been cruel, not exactly, but it had been indifferent. Sophie wasn't bullied, not in the way that left bruises or scars. She was just invisible. Quiet in the back of class, never volunteering, never drawing attention. She turned in assignments on time, smiled when spoken to, and existed in the background of group photos where no one tagged her name. Music had been her one rebellion. Not loud, not public, but personal. While her classmates filled their weekends with football games and parties, Sophie locked herself in her room, teaching herself guitar chords, scribbling lyrics on the backs of math homework. She dreamed of one day walking into school with headphones around her neck, someone stopping her in the hall saying, "I heard your song last night. It's amazing." But that never happened. Her songs stayed private. Her YouTube channel back then had less than 100 subscribers, most of them bots. If anyone from school had found her music, they never mentioned it. When graduation came, Sophie had walked across the stage to polite claps, her name announced in the same tone as everyone else's. No one knew what she wanted. No one cared. Maybe that was worse than cruelty, being unseen. Now, at 19, she still carried that weight. Every time she hit upload, she imagined someone from high school stumbling across her channel, rolling their eyes, muttering, "Of course she's still trying." The thought made her stomach churn. She pushed herself up from the bed and walked to her desk. Her notebook sat there, open to a half-finished page. The lyrics were raw, not polished. Scribbles about running out of time, about standing in a crowded room and feeling like glass. Sophie picked up her pen and underlined one line twice. "I sing to fill the silence that no one else hears." Her throat tightened. She wanted someone to hear. Not just listen. Hear. To catch the cracks in her voice, the way she lingered on certain words, the things she couldn't say out loud but wove into melodies. She wanted her music to matter to someone. But what if it never did? She turned on her keyboard and played a few soft chords. Her fingers knew the patterns by now, muscle memory carrying her through. The sound filled the room, fragile but comforting. She began to hum, then slipped into a melody. Her voice was quiet but steady, wrapping around the notes like silk. The song had no structure yet, just fragments. A verse here, a chorus there. She played until the clock glowed past midnight, then shut it down before her mom could knock on the door to remind her to sleep. As she crawled under the blanket, exhaustion hit like a wave, but her mind refused to rest. She thought of the contests, of her small following, of the polite smiles from judges who would never remember her name. She thought of the invisible girl she used to be, and the one she feared she still was. And then she thought of the message. Foster, Viwav has sent you a request. She hadn't opened it yet. She didn't know why. Maybe because if it was another scam, another empty promise, it would crush her tonight. Maybe because some tiny part of her, hopeful and afraid, wanted to believe it could be something else. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Another reminder. The name glowed again. Foster. Sophie stared at it in the dark, her pulse quickening. And finally, with a shaky breath, she reached for the screen. Chapter 4. The message. The glow of Sophie's phone felt too bright in the dark. She lay curled on her side, blanket pulled to her chin, thumb hovering above the screen. The notification sat there, taunting. New message request. Foster, wave. Her chest tightened. 9 times out of 10, message requests were junk. Bots selling promo, shady accounts promising overnight fame for a fee, strangers dropping weird compliments that made her skin crawl. But this one was different. Something about the name, short, sharp, confident, made her hesitate. She tapped it open. The message was short, simple. Hey, I make EDM dubstep music under the name Foster. I'm working on a new track and need a vocalist. I found your channel through a contest entry and thought your tone might fit. Interested in trying something out? Sophie blinked, reading it twice. 3 times. Her first reaction wasn't excitement, it was suspicion. This had to be another scam. A producer with no followers trying to rope her into some pay-to-sing scheme. She clicked his profile. Her breath caught. 28,000 followers, verified account. The profile grid was filled with clips of music, snippets of live sets, glowing DJ boards, behind-the-scenes shots of a home studio bathed in neon lights. The comments were real, buzzing with fans hyped about upcoming drops. The numbers weren't astronomical, nothing like the million-plus she sometimes scrolled past. But they were real. Solid. Foster wasn't famous, but he wasn't nothing. And he'd found her. Her heart began to pound, the way it always did when possibility cracked open in front of her. She read the message again. Your tone might fit. Her tone. Not her range, not her power, not some vague, you're good. Her tone. Sophie had spent years hating that word, hearing it tossed at her like a consolation prize. Your tone is interesting, people would say when they didn't know what else to compliment. To her, it had always felt like your voice is weird, but not awful. But here, coming from someone who seemed legitimate, it felt different. Sophie typed a reply. Deleted it, tried again, deleted it. Her hands shook. Finally, she wrote, Hi, wow, thank you for reaching out. Sure, I'd love to try something out. What did you have in mind? She hit send before she could chicken out. Her phone buzzed almost instantly. Cool, sending you a clip now. Just a rough draft of the track. Want to hear what you'd do with it before we go further? A file appeared in the chat. Sophie hesitated only a second before downloading it. The track opened with a pulsing synth, low and steady like a heartbeat. Layers built over it. Sharp hi-hats, a wash of atmospheric chords, then a drop that slammed like thunder. It was gritty and bright at once, the kind of sound that rattled through your ribs at festivals. Sophie's lips parted. Her pulse quickened. She closed her eyes and hummed softly, trying to follow the beat. Her voice felt fragile against the boldness of the instrumental, but as she sang nonsense syllables, she realized something strange. It fit. Not perfectly, not polished. But there was room for her here. She'd never tried EDM before, never thought her voice belonged anywhere near it. But somehow the contrast worked. Her soft edges against the jagged production, it clicked. She pulled her blanket tighter, heart racing. This was real. This was happening. The next morning, Sophie woke groggy but determined. She dragged her mic setup into the best corner of her room for sound, blankets draped over the chair, closet door cracked for the natural booth effect, and pulled up the file Foster had sent. Her fingers shook as she set up a simple vocal chain. Nothing fancy, just clean. She scribbled lyrics in her notebook, fragments she'd written weeks ago about breaking silence and finding space in noise. They weren't perfect, but they matched the energy. She pressed record and began. The first take was awful. Too timid. The second, slightly better. By the fifth, her throat loosened, her voice gliding in and out of the beat. She layered harmonies, doubling certain lines, pushing herself to lean into the cracks that usually embarrassed her. Here, they sounded raw, intentional. By the 10th take, Sophie stopped overthinking. She sang with her eyes closed, body swaying in time, the words spilling like she'd been waiting years to say them. When she played it back, goosebumps prickled her arms. It wasn't perfect, but it was her. She bounced the file, compressed it nervously, and sent it to Foster with a short message. Here's a rough idea. Hope it works for you. Her thumb hovered before pressing send. She exhaled sharply, then tapped. The message flew out into the digital void. The reply came that evening. Holy shit, this is exactly what I was hoping for. Are you free to meet up and work on it? Sophie froze. Meet up? Her stomach flipped. Was this real? Was she about to walk into a stranger's studio? Every cautionary tale she'd ever heard rang in her ears, but she clicked his profile again, scrolled through. Foster was legitimate. Real shows, tagged by other artists, pictures with crowds. Still, nerves gripped her. She typed carefully. Yeah, I'm free. Where's your studio? He sent an address in the city, an actual studio space, judging by the photos attached. Professional, clean. Her nerves buzzed even louder. And then came another message. BWTW, what's your real name? Easier if I know who I'm working with, LOL. Sophie hesitated. She almost typed Soph Sings, then stopped. He'd know eventually. Sophie Hall. The typing bubble popped up instantly. Wait, Sophie Hall? Like, from Central High? Her heart skipped. Yeah, why? Dude, we had like 3 classes together. I'm Graham Fosters. The name hit her like a bell. She sat up straighter, memory scrambling. Graham. Loud, confident, always joking in the back row of English. They'd never spoken, not once. But she remembered his laugh, the way he never seemed nervous about anything. He hadn't been cruel, he just hadn't noticed her. Her chest tightened. Wow, small world, she typed back. No kidding, he replied. Didn't even recognize you at first. Crazy. Anyway, you down to come by tomorrow? Sophie stared at the screen, 1,000 feelings colliding. The invisible girl from high school. The loud boy she barely remembered. And now, maybe, just maybe, her first real shot. She typed back, fingers trembling. Yeah, tomorrow works. Chapter 5. Strangers Again. The studio door was heavier than Sophie expected. Her palms sweated against the strap of her bag as she stood in the hallway, staring at the small gold letters painted across the frosted glass. Room B. Every step that had brought her here, through the subway ride, the 3 blocks of city noise, the awkward hello at the front desk, had felt surreal. She'd kept waiting for someone to stop her, to say, sorry, wrong, Sophie, to laugh in her face. But no one had. The receptionist had checked the schedule, nodded politely, and pointed her down the hall. Now she was here. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass. Pale skin, dark circles beneath her eyes, hair pulled back too hastily. She wanted to look like an artist walking into her own session. She felt like a kid sneaking into someone else's playground. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Inside. Doors open. Her throat tightened. She pushed the door open. The studio smelled faintly of coffee and cables, with the low hum of machines always present, like a second heartbeat. LED strips glowed soft blue along the baseboards. At the far end of the room, behind a console of blinking buttons and screens, sat Graham. He looked older than high school. Sharper jawline, broader shoulders, hair tied back in a loose bun. But the grin, lazy, boyish, was the same one she remembered from the back of English class. He turned as she stepped in. "Sophie Hall," he said, voice carrying that same confidence she remembered. "Didn't think I'd see you here." She forced a small smile. "Yeah, surprise." He stood, crossing the room with easy strides. "Seriously, though, wild. I didn't even put it together until you said your name. Guess the quiet ones really do sneak up on you." The words stung more than they should have. She swallowed. "I guess." Up close, he looked impossibly at ease, wearing a black hoodie with sleeves shoved to his elbows. She noticed faint calluses on his hands, the kind musicians earn from hours of gear setup. He gestured toward the mic booth. "You ready to give this a real shot?" Her stomach flipped. Ready? She wasn't sure she'd ever be ready. Still, she nodded. "Yeah." The booth was small, walls padded with dark foam. A single mic hung from a stand, silver mesh glinting under the light. Sophie closed the door behind her, sealing herself in. Through the glass, Graham adjusted knobs and leaned into the talkback mic. "Headphones on the hook. Just sing through what you sent me yesterday. We'll start there. No pressure." No pressure. Easy for him to say. Her hands trembled as she lifted the headphones, sliding them over her ears. The track pulsed in, familiar but louder, fuller. She gripped the mic, mouth dry. When she opened her mouth, the first note cracked. Heat rushed to her cheeks. She stopped. "Sorry," she muttered, though he couldn't hear her without the mic. She cleared her throat, tried again. This time, the sound flowed cleaner, though her nerves clung to every syllable. She sang the verse she'd written, voice softer than intended, like she was apologizing for taking up space. When the beat dropped, she faltered again, instinctively lowering her volume. The track ended. Silence pressed against her ears. Through the glass, Graham leaned back in his chair, nodding slowly. He pressed the button. "That's good, real good, but..." He tilted his head. "You're holding back, right?" Her chest tightened. "Maybe." He grinned. "Don't, that's the whole point. The cracks, the edge, that's what makes it yours. Otherwise, you sound like everyone else." His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp, focused. For the first time, Sophie felt like he was really listening. "Try it again," he said, "like you're pissed off, like you want to break something." She blinked. "What?" "Trust me, just lean in." She hesitated, but something in his certainty nudged her forward. She closed her eyes, let the track flood her veins, and sang again. This time, she didn't try to smooth the cracks. She let her voice rasp where it wanted, let it rise sharp where she normally pulled back. By the final chorus, she wasn't even thinking. The sound tore out of her, raw and imperfect, and for a split second she felt weightless. The track ended. She opened her eyes, chest heaving. Graham stared through the glass, eyebrows raised. A slow smile spread across his face. "There it is," he said. Her cheeks burned, but not from shame this time. From something dangerously close to pride. The session stretched on, hours slipping by unnoticed. They tried harmonies, experimented with phrasing, looped sections over and over until Sophie's throat ached. Between takes, Graham cracked jokes, easy and unforced. He moved with the comfort of someone who'd lived in rooms like this for years, but he never made her feel small. He asked what she thought of mixes, genuinely pausing for her input. When she suggested a change, a longer reverb tail on the verse, he tried it immediately, nodding like she'd said something brilliant. It was dizzying. When they finally stopped, Sophie's voice was raw, her body drained, but her mind buzzed with a wild, dangerous thought. "I belong here." They packed up slowly, the room quieter without the music filling it. Sophie zipped her bag, glancing at Graham. He caught her look, smirked. "What?" "Nothing." She shook her head quickly. He shrugged, slinging his hoodie over his shoulder. You're good, Hall. Better than I expected. There was no malice in the words, but they landed heavy anyway. She forced a thin smile. Thanks. They stepped out into the cool night air. City lights shimmered across wet pavement, the smell of street food drifting in from the corner. For a moment, Sophie thought he might say something more. Something real, something past the banter. But instead, he shoved his hands in his pockets, grinned, and said, Same time tomorrow? Her heart thudded. Tomorrow. Yeah, she said softly. Tomorrow. Chapter 6, Studio Chemistry. The studio had already begun to feel familiar. The second night Sophie walked through the hall, she didn't hesitate at the door. The gold letters on the frosted glass still gleamed, but they didn't feel like a barrier anymore. They felt like a signpost. This way. This is where you belong. Inside, Graham was already at the console, nodding his head to a looped section of drums so loud the floor seemed to vibrate. His hoodie was different, but still oversized, sleeves bunched at his elbows as though he couldn't stand fabric between himself and the buttons. Hall, he called over the beat, glancing up as she slipped inside. Good timing. Got something new to show you. The greeting wasn't awkward this time. She smiled, small, careful but real, and set her bag down in the corner. Ready when you are. The hours blurred into each other. They worked through verse structures, Graham layering heavy bass lines while Sophie tested melodies over them. Sometimes her ideas stumbled. Sometimes his beats felt too harsh under her voice. But when the right combination landed, it was like a switch flipped. Everything locked in, and the room itself seemed to hum with it. Between takes, they filled the silences with little conversations. What did you even do after high school? He asked at one point, leaning back in his chair with a can of soda balanced on his knee. She hesitated. Tried college for a semester. Music theory, actually, but it felt wrong. Too technical, too structured. I wanted to sing, not calculate. He nodded like he understood. I didn't even make it that far. Straight into software and synths. My parents thought I was wasting time until I paid rent with my first remix. Sophie laughed softly. Bet that shut them up. Pretty much. Moments like that slipped in easily, nestled between vocal warm-ups and takes. Little glimpses of who they were outside the studio, though neither pushed too far. The third hour brought frustration. Her throat was tight, a stubborn rasp clinging to every note. Graham stopped playback and swiveled in his chair, frowning. You're in your head again, he said. She pressed her palms against her jeans. It's not coming out the way I want. Because you're forcing it. He gestured toward the mic. Look, singing's not about perfect, it's about feeling. You ever scream sing in the car when no one's watching? She blinked. Of course. Then do that. Right here. Forget me. Forget the booth. Forget the record button. Just let it go. Her stomach nodded at the thought. The booth didn't feel private, no matter how padded the walls. But his eyes were steady, unflinching. Try it once, he added, voice softer now. Just for you. No one else. She swallowed, stepped back into the booth, and let the beat roll. This time, she didn't aim for polish. She sang like she did alone in her bedroom, raw and unguarded. Her voice cracked once, but she didn't stop. When the final note faded, her chest rose and fell like she'd just sprinted. Through the glass, Graham lifted a hand in a slow clap. There, that's it. That's the Soph Sings sound. Her cheeks burned, but pride swelled alongside it. By midnight, exhaustion had blurred into giddiness. They sprawled on the worn leather couch, half-eaten pizza box on the table between them. Sophie sipped lukewarm soda while Graham scrolled through his laptop, tinkering with levels even while half asleep. You never stop, do you? She teased, her voice hoarse. He smirked without looking up. And you're the one still sitting here. She rolled her eyes, but she didn't deny it. The truth was, she didn't want to leave. The studio felt more alive than her apartment ever did. Here, surrounded by cables and echoing beats, she wasn't the invisible girl from high school or the nobody with 2,000 followers. She was something else. someone who mattered. She leaned her head back against the couch, closing her eyes. Feels like, I don't know, like I'm finally starting to sound like me. Graham glanced up, studying her for a long moment. Then he shut his laptop and stretched, cracking his knuckles. That's all I want, he said simply. The real you, not the version you think people expect. The words settled over her, quiet but heavy. She opened her eyes to find him watching her, not with his usual teasing grin, but with something steadier. Something she couldn't name yet. They left together, the city long past quiet. Streetlights cast pale pools on the pavement, and the night smelled faintly of rain. Sophie hugged her bag to her chest, still buzzing from the session. Graham walked with his hands shoved into his hoodie pocket, steps unhurried. At the corner, they paused. Same time tomorrow? He asked. She nodded. Yeah. And when he smiled, she realized the thought of tomorrow didn't feel scary anymore. It felt like the only place she wanted to be. Chapter 7. Finding the Sound. The beat began as nothing more than a skeleton. A low pulse, a few syncopated clicks, a rising swell that threatened to drop but never gave it. Graham tapped the space bar, looping the rough outline again and again until Sophie could almost feel it in her ribs. Okay, he muttered, leaning over the console. This is the backbone. Needs flesh. That's where you come in. She sat on the stool beside him, headphones around her neck, notebook open across her knees. Her pen had sketched half-formed lyrics in the margins, words she'd tested in whispers, lines that never quite fit. The track demanded something sharper. But what? She stared at the empty lines, willing the right phrase to appear. What if it starts soft? Graham said, glancing at her. Bare, just your voice, almost vulnerable. Then the build, then the drop. He snapped his fingers. That's the punch. Contrast. She chewed the end of her pen. Like light into dark. Exactly. The idea sparked something. She bent over the notebook, scribbling fast. Phrases tumbled out, fragments of emotion she hadn't realized she'd been holding back. Not polished lyrics yet, but raw material. Try it, he said, already cueing the loop. She stepped into the booth, notebook in hand. The mic loomed like a silent judge, but she ignored it this time. The track bled into her ears, and she let the words roll. Her voice was shaky at first, searching. Then she hit a line that rang true, and it clicked. She leaned into it, letting the melody carve itself from instinct. The notes weren't perfect, but they carried weight. When the drop hit, she lifted her voice higher, sharper, riding the beat like a wave. By the time the loop ended, she was breathless. Through the glass, Graham's grin stretched wide. He slammed the talkback button. That's it. That's it. Her pulse raced. For once, she didn't doubt him. She felt it too. The song had just been born. The next hours blurred into obsession. They tore through takes, refining, experimenting. Graham layered textures beneath her vocals, shimmering synths, distorted echoes, a bass that rattled the floor. Sophie shifted phrasing, bending vowels until they fit like puzzle pieces. At one point, he pushed his chair back, running both hands through his hair. God, listen to this, he muttered, replaying a section. The beat crashed, her voice soared, and for a moment it sounded bigger than the small studio walls could contain. Sophie pressed her hands against her thighs, heart hammering. It didn't feel like hers. Not entirely. It felt like theirs. Around midnight, they collapsed on the couch, both drained and exhilarated. The track played faintly from the monitors, looping in the background like a heartbeat. Sophie leaned her head back, eyes closed. That was something. Something? Graham chuckled, tossing an empty soda can toward the trash. It missed. That was a banger in the making. She laughed softly, voice hoarse. You really think so? He turned his head, studying her. I don't think. I know. You hear that drop? You owned it. Her cheeks warmed. She wanted to argue, tell him she'd cracked a note, that she'd stumbled on a line, but for once, the urge didn't win. Instead, she said quietly, It felt good. Good? He smirked. Felt electric. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the faint hum of the track. Sophie realized she could hear his breathing, steady and close. Funny, he said suddenly. We were in the same class for a whole year, and I never knew you could sing like this. Funny, she echoed, eyes still closed. I never knew you could do this. She gestured vaguely toward the equipment, the music, the whole atmosphere of it. Guess we were both hiding, he said. Her eyes flicked open. He wasn't smiling now. His expression was softer, almost thoughtful. Why did you? She asked before she could stop herself. Hiding? She nodded. He shrugged, leaning back. High school's a performance. Loudest wins. I played the part. He paused, glancing at her. But you didn't play at all. You just disappeared. The words weren't cruel. They were matter of fact, tinged with curiosity. Her throat tightened. I didn't know how not to. He nodded slowly, as if that made sense. The silence stretched, heavier now. Sophie's chest felt tight, not in the suffocating way of self-doubt, but in a way that was almost alive. At 2 a.m., they finally packed up. The track was still rough, unfinished, but it pulsed with promise. As they stepped out into the night air, Sophie hugged her notebook to her chest. Graham shoved his hands in his pockets, walking beside her in easy strides. At the corner, under the glow of a streetlight, he stopped. Tomorrow, he said, meeting her eyes. We finish it. She nodded, too wired to sleep, too exhausted to think. Tomorrow. And for the first time, she believed it. Chapter 8. Between the Lines. The third night in the studio was different. From the moment Sophie walked in, there was a charge in the air, an urgency that hadn't been there before. Graham barely looked up from the console as she dropped her bag in the corner. His fingers flew over keys, adjusting sliders, queuing up layers of sound like he was racing against something invisible. Hall, he said, breathless. Listen to this. He hit the spacebar. The track exploded out of the monitors. Not the skeleton they'd started with, not the patchwork they'd been tinkering through. This was alive. Her vocals, stitched from takes across the last 2 nights, soared above the beat, lifted higher by shimmering synths. Then the drop hit. Louder, cleaner, devastating. Sophie's chest clenched. It wasn't finished, not yet, but it was there. The thing they'd been chasing. She pressed a hand against the back of the chair to steady herself. That's... wow. Right? Graham's grin was wild, boyish. We're close. Real close. Just need the edges smoothed. She nodded, sinking onto the stool beside him. Her notebook rested on her knees, but she didn't open it. She couldn't take her eyes off the waveforms dancing across the screen, her voice tangled in digital light. It still startled her. That was her. The hours bled together. They replayed the chorus again and again, arguing over milliseconds. Graham wanted the snare sharper. Sophie insisted the echo lingered too long on the second verse. They layered, stripped back, layered again. At one point, Sophie stood in the booth with headphones on, testing alternate phrasings while Graham looped the track. Her throat ached, but she pushed through. Again, he called through the mic. She glared at the glass. That was 6 times. And the 7th's gonna be magic. She groaned, but she sang it again, and hated to admit it was better. When the take ended, Graham leaned into the talkback, smirking. See? Told you. She rolled her eyes, but couldn't suppress her smile. By midnight, the studio felt like a cocoon. The world outside barely existed. They sat cross-legged on the floor now, laptops balanced between pizza boxes and crumpled notes. Sophie hummed melodies under her breath, recording snippets into her phone. Graham tapped beats against his thigh, head bobbing in rhythm even as his eyelids drooped. Do you ever stop? She asked, watching him layer yet another effect. Not when I'm this close. He didn't look up. You? She hesitated, then admitted, No, not when it feels like this. He glanced at her then, and for a heartbeat, their eyes locked. Something flickered in his expression. Not teasing, not smug. Something quieter. Sophie's stomach flipped. She looked away quickly, scribbling in her notebook, though the page stayed blank. Around 2 a.m., exhaustion set in. Her voice was shot, rough from hours of pushing. Graham noticed before she did. "Call it," he said suddenly, closing his laptop. She blinked. "What? No, we're almost there." "You're done." His tone was firm but not unkind. "Your throat's telling on you." She touched her neck self-consciously. He was right. Every swallow scraped. He stood stretching, then grabbed 2 bottles of water from the mini fridge and tossed one to her. "Hydrate. Sleep. We'll hit it fresher tomorrow." She wanted to argue, but the truth was her body begged for rest. She twisted the cap and drank deeply, the cool liquid soothing the burn. When she looked up, Graham was watching her with that same unreadable expression. "What?" she asked softly. He shrugged, smiling faintly. "Just never thought the quiet girl from English class would be sitting here, killing a track with me." Her cheeks heated. Never thought the loud kid with detention slips would be producing one. They both laughed, the sound loosening the tightness in her chest. They lingered longer than necessary, packing slowly, letting the silence stretch. Sophie caught herself humming as she zipped her bag, snatches of the chorus that refused to leave her. "You realize this could blow up, right?" Graham said casually as they headed for the door. She blinked. "You think so?" "I know so." His grin was confident, but there was a spark in his eyes that told her it wasn't just bravado. He believed it. He believed in her. The thought left her dizzy. The night outside was cool, the streets nearly empty. They walked side by side, the city humming quietly around them. Sophie hugged her notebook to her chest, every step echoing the rhythm of the track still pulsing in her veins. At the corner, they paused under the glow of a streetlight. "Tomorrow?" Graham asked. She nodded. "Tomorrow." And as she turned to leave, she realized something dangerous. The idea of tomorrow with him was starting to feel just as important as the music itself. Chapter 9. Unfinished Symmetry. The 4th night didn't feel like a continuation. It felt like escalation. Sophie knew it the moment she stepped into the studio. The air was warm from the equipment, heavy with the smell of coffee and takeout that clung to every corner. The track waited on the screen, frozen mid-wave form, as if holding its breath for them to return. Graham was already pacing when she walked in, muttering to himself, headphones slung around his neck. His eyes lit up the second he saw her. "Hall, finally." She smirked. "It's 9. Normal people call this early." "Normal people don't make history." He swept his hand toward the desk, theatrical. "We're close. One good push and we've got it." Something in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't just ambition. It was certainty. They started with the bridge. Over and over, Sophie sang the lines, each time trying a different tilt of emotion. Softer here, sharper there. Graham pushed her hard, sometimes harsh, but always in pursuit of better. "You're pulling back," he said after the 5th take. "I'm not," she argued, wiping sweat from her brow. "You are. You're thinking about the note instead of feeling it." Her jaw tightened. "Easy for you to say." His gaze held hers through the glass. "Prove me wrong." The challenge burned hotter than the studio lights. She inhaled, closed her eyes, and sang again. Not technically perfect, but raw, her voice breaking just enough to ache. When the last note faded, silence filled the booth. Then Graham leaned into the mic. His voice was quiet. "That's it." Her heart thudded, not from the singing, but from the way he said it, like she'd just given him something no one else had. They took a break after that, sprawling on the studio floor, backs against the wall. The hum of the console was the only sound between them. Sophie's head tipped back, eyes tracing the ceiling tiles. "I can't even hear my own thoughts anymore. It's just beat, Chorus, beat, chorus. Graham laughed softly. That's when you know it's good. It gets under your skin. You don't escape it. Feels more like possession. Same thing? Their shoulders brushed as he shifted, and Sophie stilled. The contact was small, accidental, but it lingered, warm through the thin fabric of her sleeve. Neither of them moved away. When they dove back in, the song resisted. The second verse didn't sit right. The layering fought itself. Sophie's voice clipped against the beat. They argued, circled the problems, argued again. At one point, Graham slammed the spacebar. It's off, you hear that, right? Yes, but maybe it's not the verse. Maybe it's the drop afterward. No, it's right there. He jabbed at the screen, frustration sharp in his tone. She snapped back before she could stop herself. Stop treating me like I don't hear it too. The room went still. He looked at her, surprised, not at the words, but at the steel in her voice. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face. There she is. What? The fighter. He leaned back in his chair, hands behind his head. Knew you had claws somewhere. Sophie's cheeks burned, but she refused to look away. I'm not just here to nod along. Good. His grin softened. Wouldn't want you to be. The tension cracked something open between them, not just in the music, but in the air itself. And when they adjusted the verse again, it fell into place almost instantly, like it had been waiting for that clash. By 2 a.m, the track was whole. Not polished, not mixed, but whole. Every section tied together, a living, breathing thing that pulsed through the speakers. Sophie stood in the center of the room as it played, arms wrapped around herself. Her voice filled the space, layered and doubled, lifted by Graham's beats into something bigger than she thought she could ever be. When it ended, the silence hit harder than any bass drop. She turned slowly, meeting Graham's eyes across the desk. He looked wrecked, tired, exhilarated, in something else she couldn't name. They didn't speak for a long time. Finally, Graham exhaled. We did it. Her lips parted. The words felt too small, but she whispered anyway. Yeah. Packing up took forever. Not because there was much to put away, but because neither seemed willing to break the moment. At the door, Sophie hesitated. So, what happens now? Now? Graham leaned against the frame, arms crossed. We mix it, polish it, send it out, let it catch fire. Her chest tightened. And if it doesn't? He tilted his head, studying her, then, quietly, it already did. Her breath caught. He wasn't looking at the track when he said it. He was looking at her. Sophie walked home in a daze, the city lights blurring around her. Her headphones dangled uselessly from her pocket. She didn't need them. The song was already in her blood, looping endlessly. But louder than the music was the echo of Graham's voice, the weight of his gaze, the unspoken thing that had started to hum between them. The song might have been finished. She wasn't so sure they were. Chapter 10. Into the noise. The file sat there, shimmering in its digital stillness. Just an MP3, just a few megabytes of sound stitched together. But for Sophie, it may as well have been her soul compressed into a waveform. Her laptop screen glowed in the dim of her bedroom, the upload bar creeping forward. She watched every percent like it might stall, like the world might suddenly decide this wasn't allowed to happen. 29%, 42, 58. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, twisting the hem of her oversized hoodie. She was in pajamas, hair a mess, knees tucked to her chest. For all the magic they'd built in the studio, here she was again, a girl alone in her room, waiting for the internet to decide if she mattered. Her phone buzzed. Graham. Don't overthink it. Click post, then breathe. She exhaled through her nose. Easy for him to say. His tracks always had a built-in audience. People waited for Foster to drop something new. For Soph Sings, this was the first time the world would hear her. Not in a contest, not in a shaky Instagram live, but in a finished song. A song that was half her voice, half his beats, and all their sweat and hours. The upload hit 100%. A bright button appeared. Publish. Sophie's pulse hammered. For a moment she hovered, then with a shaky laugh that sounded nothing like confidence, she clicked. The track went live on SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. One click and it belonged to everyone. Sophie shut her laptop with a snap, as though closing it could contain what she'd just unleashed. Her stomach twisted like she'd handed strangers her diary and begged them to highlight the worst parts. Her phone buzzed again. "Graham, it's up. I'll push it out now." A minute later, she saw his posts. At Foster Beats' new drop. Different. Special. This one's with that Soph Sings. Out now. Different. Special. The words made her cheeks warm. She opened Twitter, thumb hovering over the retweet button before finally pressing it. Her post was smaller, humbler. "Hi, so this is real. I got to work with Foster on a song. Hope you like it." Her 2.7K followers saw it instantly. Some liked. A handful commented. But it wasn't a tidal wave. Not yet. Sophie tossed her phone onto the bed and buried her face in her pillow. The hours that followed were torture. She tried to distract herself, scrolled TikTok, watched half an episode of a show, paced her room. But her eyes kept darting to her notifications. 34 streams, 102 streams, 247 streams. Her heart leapt and sank at once. The numbers climbed, but slowly, agonizingly. Not the rocket launch she'd hoped for, not the explosion Graham had promised. By the time midnight rolled around, Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at her phone screen like it might explain itself. The comments were kind but sparse. This is different, but in a good way. Her voice? Wow. Foster never misses. But there weren't thousands, not yet. She texted Graham. "Sophie, maybe this was a mistake." The typing dots appeared instantly. Graham, "No, it's climbing. Give it a day. Trust me." Trust. The word settled into her chest. She wanted to believe him. The next morning, she woke up groggy, eyes gritty from too little sleep. Her phone was buzzing on the nightstand. She fumbled for it, blearily unlocking, and froze. 17.4K plays. Hundreds of comments. Her follower count had doubled overnight. Her throat tightened as she scrolled. This collab came out of nowhere, but holy hell, it slaps. Never heard of Soph Sings before, but she just got added to my playlist. Replay button broken. She pressed her hands to her mouth, a laugh breaking free, half relief, half disbelief. Before she could overthink it, her phone lit up with a call from Graham. She answered breathlessly. "Hi. Check the YouTube comments." His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't slept either. And Twitter, and, hell, just everything. We're trending. Her brain blanked. Trending? He chuckled, disbelieving. Number 23 on the electronic chart this morning. Sophie, it's moving. Her knees gave out and she collapsed back onto her bed. Oh my God. On the other end, he was laughing now too. Tired, exhilarated, like they were both riding the same lightning. The day became a blur. Retweets, DMs, reaction TikToks. Her phone never stopped buzzing, her name popping up in places it never had before. For once, not as a desperate contestant or small-time singer, as part of something real. Her parents didn't quite understand, but her little sister screamed when Sophie showed her the streaming numbers. "You're like famous." Sophie laughed, dizzy. Not famous, just loud all of a sudden. But when she returned to her room and opened her laptop, staring at the dashboard graph rocketing upward, the reality hit harder. People weren't just listening. They were hearing. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. That night, Graham texted her again. "Graham, studio tomorrow?" She hesitated. They didn't have a next project lined up yet. They'd poured everything into this one track. But she typed back, "Sophie." "Yeah, studio." Because she realized it wasn't just the music pulling her back. It was the look on his face when he said we did it. It was the way he'd believed in her voice when she hadn't. And if the world was finally starting to believe too, Then maybe, just maybe, Sophie Hall could start believing in herself. Chapter 11. The Weight of Eyes. The emails came first. At 7 in the morning, Sophie checked her inbox expecting the usual. Promo spam, newsletters, maybe a stray bill. Instead, her screen flooded with subject lines that made her pulse spike. Collaboration opportunity. Booking inquiry. We'd love to connect. She blinked, rereading. Sure, it had to be spam. But the senders weren't faceless bots. They were names she half recognized from industry headlines. Managers of artists she'd streamed, small labels she'd envied from afar. Her song with Graham wasn't just climbing, it was opening doors. She sat frozen at her desk, laptop glowing against her pale face, while her heart thudded so hard it hurt. By the time she got to the studio, Graham was already there, half a Red Bull in hand, phone pressed to his ear. "No, I'm not interested in a licensing deal right now." I said no. "Look, email me." "Yeah, email." He hung up with a sharp sigh, tossing the can into the trash. When he noticed Sophie, his grin flickered to life. "Morning, superstar?" She rolled her eyes, trying to downplay the heat rising in her cheeks. "Don't." "I'm serious. You've seen the numbers, right?" He gestured toward his screen, where the track's plays ticked upward in real time. 175,000. In 3 days. Do you know how insane that is? Sophie sank into a chair, hugging her bag. I also saw my inbox. Graham's brow lifted. "Oh? Offers, collabs. People actually want me. Like me, not just us." The words felt fragile, dangerous to speak aloud. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Graham leaned back in his chair, arms behind his head. "Told you, you've got it." Her chest tightened. She wanted to believe it wasn't just him being kind, that he meant it, that it was real. But the flood of attention made her head spin. "What if I screw it up?" she whispered. Graham's eyes softened. "Then you screw it up. And we fix it. That's the game." They tried to work, but concentration was impossible. Sophie's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Every few minutes, she peeked. A retweet from an artist she admired, a DM from a local radio host, another offer that made her jaw drop. At one point, she groaned and tossed the phone across the couch. "I can't think. It's like everybody's watching, and I don't know what to do with it." Graham studied her, thoughtful. "You ever been on stage?" She hesitated. "Not really. Not unless you count high school choir." "That explains it." He leaned forward. "You're used to hiding in corners, waiting to be picked. But this is your spotlight, Soph. People are finally turning their heads. And you deserve it." Her throat ached. "You make it sound easy." "It's not easy. It's terrifying." His grin returned, crooked and bright. "But it's also the best high you'll ever get." By afternoon, Graham suggested they step out. The studio walls felt too close, the air too heavy with expectation. They wandered downtown, weaving past food trucks and storefronts, sunglasses pulled low. For once, Sophie felt like she was living in some split reality. The anonymous city around her, and the virtual storm online where her name was suddenly trending. They grabbed sandwiches and sat on a bench in the park. Graham scrolled through his phone, laughing as he read fan comments aloud. "Listen to this. Her voice sounds like velvet dipped in lightning." "That's poetry right there." Sophie covered her face, groaning. "Why do you read them out loud?" "Because you need to hear it. Half your life, people ignored you. Now strangers are writing odes. You should let it sink in." She peeked at him between her fingers. "You're enjoying this too much." "Damn right I am. I knew we had something, but watching the world catch on?" He shook his head, still grinning. "Nothing better." Her heart squeezed. Not just because of the success, but because of how he looked at her when he said we. Like she wasn't some lucky tag-along, but his equal. That evening, back at the studio, Sophie braved her inbox again. She clicked on one email at random, a proposal from a mid-sized indie label. Her voice wavered. "They want me to cut vocals for 2 of their artists, paid gigs." Graham glanced over her shoulder. "Decent names, too." She bit her lip. Should I? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned his chair, facing her fully. That's your call, Soph. If you want it, take it. If you don't, don't. I'll back you either way. The words lodged in her chest. He wasn't trying to claim her. He wasn't holding her back. He was giving her the freedom to choose, even if it meant stepping away from him. That kind of trust scared her more than any offer. Later, after Graham left for the night, Sophie lingered in the booth. The track played on loop through the monitors, her own voice swelling with every drop. She closed her eyes, letting it wash over her. For the first time, she didn't hear a girl begging to be noticed. She heard someone strong, someone alive, someone worth turning the volume up for. But she also felt the weight of eyes on her. Labels, artists, strangers. Everyone pulling, expecting, demanding. She pressed her palms against the glass, whispering into the empty room. Don't lose yourself now. The hum of the speakers didn't answer, but in her chest she felt the faint echo of Graham's voice. You deserve it. And for tonight at least, she let herself believe him. Chapter 12. The machine's hands. The first meeting was virtual. Sophie sat at her desk, heart pounding as the Zoom window filled with faces, neat haircuts, designer glasses, rooms with expensive lighting. She felt like an intruder in sweatpants, clutching a chipped coffee mug like a shield. The man in the center smiled wide. Sophie Hall, or should I say Soph Sings. Her throat went dry. Hi. We love what you and Foster have done. The track's fresh, authentic, exactly what the market's craving. The market. Sophie swallowed. She wasn't sure if she liked being referred to as a commodity, but she kept her smile glued in place. The call rolled on. Licensing opportunities, playlists, sync placements. The words blurred together into a language she half understood. She nodded when it seemed appropriate, jotted notes that made no sense, and prayed she wouldn't be asked anything direct. When the meeting finally ended, she collapsed into her chair, legs weak. Her phone buzzed. Graham, how'd it go? Sophie, I felt like a kid sneaking into a boardroom. Graham, good. Means you're doing something right. She stared at his message, both comforted and rattled. Was this right? Was she ready? The days blurred into a carousel of calls and emails. Labels wanted to talk. Indie producers wanted her voice. Event organizers asked if she was open to showcases. Sophie's inbox became a battlefield. Every subject line promised something bigger. Every message came with a subtext. We see you, but what will you give us? She tried to answer, but her hands shook with every reply. When she confessed this to Graham in the studio, he tilted his head, watching her. You're allowed to say no, you know. Her laugh came out brittle. Easy for you to say. You've already built your name. And you're building yours now. He leaned forward, eyes steady. But you don't owe anyone more than you want to give. The words should have comforted her. Instead, they reminded her of the weight she carried, a fragile dream that the world suddenly wanted to devour. One afternoon, her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it, but curiosity won. Hello? A smooth voice answered. Sophie? This is Mariah James, talent manager. I represent several rising vocalists in your space. I think you and I should meet. Sophie froze. She'd read about Mariah sharp, successful, ruthless. The kind of manager who turned nobodies into festival headliners. I don't know if I'm looking for management right now, Sophie stammered. Mariah's laugh was warm but edged. Sweetheart, you don't look for management. Management finds you. I'll email you some time slots. The call ended before Sophie could protest. She sat in silence, pulse racing, until Graham wandered into the booth. You look like you saw a ghost. I think I just got hunted, she whispered. That evening, Graham insisted they take a break. They grabbed dinner at a hole-in-the-wall diner near the studio, the kind with sticky booths and menus laminated within an inch of their lives. Sophie poked at her fries. What if I pick wrong? A manager? A label? What if I trust the wrong person? Graham shrugged, sipping his soda. You will, at some point. Everyone does. Her stomach tightened. That's supposed to help. It's supposed to remind you that screwing up doesn't end you. You learn, you adapt, you keep singing. He leaned back, studying her. Besides, you've got instincts. You knew I was worth trusting. Her cheeks heated. That was different. Was it? His grin was small, teasing, but there was something serious under it. She didn't answer. She couldn't. The unspoken thing between them was getting louder, harder to ignore. Back in her apartment that night, Sophie opened her email to find Mariah's proposed meeting times. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. She thought about the boardroom faces, the emails piling up, the strangers already trying to shape her into something marketable. She thought about Graham, the way he gave her space, the way he never demanded but always believed. She closed the laptop without replying. Not tonight. Not yet. Instead, she grabbed her headphones, pressed play on the track again, and let her own voice fill her small room. It was hers. No matter how many hands tried to claim it, it was hers first. And for now, that was enough. Chapter 13. Fractures and Fire. The city felt louder now. Sophie noticed it everywhere. Billboards blaring other artists' faces, cars rattling with bass from open windows, kids humming songs as they passed her on the sidewalk. Music was inescapable, and for the first time, she was part of that noise. Her phone buzzed constantly, her name pinging across platforms she hadn't even touched before. A week ago, she was invisible. Now, she was a commodity. And it terrified her. The meeting with Mariah James happened on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. Sophie sat in the corner booth of a sleek cafe, damp hoodie clinging to her shoulders, while Mariah slid into the seat opposite. Perfect hair, perfect nails, eyes sharp as glass. "Let me be clear," Mariah began, voice low but commanding. "You have momentum. Momentum doesn't wait. If you don't capitalize, someone else will." Sophie swallowed. What does capitalizing look like? Mariah's smile was both kind and predatory. Cut vocals for established names, do live features, align with labels who can boost your reach. You can be everywhere in 6 months. Festivals, tours, money. The words dazzled and scared her in equal measure. "And Foster?" she asked, softly. Mariah tilted her head as if amused by the question. "Producers come and go. Vocalists with staying power, that's rare. Don't chain yourself to one person. Think bigger." The words stung, even though she knew Mariah wasn't entirely wrong. But something in Sophie recoiled. She couldn't picture her voice without Graham's beats behind it. Couldn't imagine walking into another stranger's studio and finding the same fire. Still, when the meeting ended, she left with a folder of contracts and her heart pounding at the crossroads ahead. That night, she walked into the studio to find Graham hunched over the console, hoodie pulled tight, the glow of the screen painting him in pale blues. He looked up, grinning. "Hey, Hall. Guess what? We broke 500,000 streams." She forced a smile. "That's huge." "You don't sound thrilled." "I'm just tired." She set her bag down, hesitating before adding, "I met with Mariah James today." The grin faltered just slightly. "Oh." "She thinks I should branch out, work with other producers, labels. She doesn't think I should tie myself down." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the hum of the equipment. Finally, Graham leaned back, arms crossed. "She's not wrong." Her stomach dropped. "You agree with her?" "I agree you should do what's best for you." His voice was steady, but his eyes flickered. "If bigger offers come, take them. Don't stay out of loyalty." The words cut deeper than she expected. She wanted him to fight, to tell her she belonged here with him. But instead, he gave her freedom, and it felt like rejection. They worked in silence after that. Sophie's vocals drifted over new beats, but the spark was muted, dulled by the unspoken tension between them. At one point, she caught him watching her through the glass, eyes unreadable. Their gazes locked, and something electric surged through her chest. For a heartbeat, the rest of the world, contracts, offers, streams, fell away. Then he looked down, breaking it. The following days blurred into chaos. Sophie was pulled into calls with radio hosts, offers for features stacked higher, invitations to showcases hit her inbox like waves. Everywhere she turned, people were asking for her, except Graham. He still showed up, still built beats, still cheered when their track climbed another chart. But he didn't ask her to stay. He didn't ask for anything at all. And that silence became unbearable. On Friday night, Sophie stood on her apartment balcony, city lights sprawled below. The contracts Mariah had given her sat on the table inside, pages filled with promises she couldn't quite believe. Her phone buzzed. Graham's name lit the screen. For a moment, she hesitated, afraid of what she'd hear, or worse, what she wouldn't. She answered. "Hey," he said, voice tired but warm. "You good?" Her throat tightened. "I don't know." Silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Finally, he sighed. "Soph, whatever happens, you've already made it. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Her eyes stung. "Even if that means, not with you." The pause on his end was sharp. Then, softly, "Even then." The word shattered something in her. But underneath the ache, a truth bloomed. He wasn't letting her go because he didn't care. He was letting her go because he did. And suddenly, Sophie realized she had a choice. Not just about contracts or collabs, but about what kind of artist and what kind of person she wanted to be. She didn't sign the papers that night. Instead, she sat with her headphones on, listening to their track again and again until dawn, clinging to the one place where everything still felt clear, inside the music they'd built together. Chapter 14. The choice. The pen hovered over the dotted line. Sophie's hand trembled, the page beneath it crisp and gleaming. The contract smelled faintly of ink and fresh paper, but to her, it might as well have been smoke. Mariah's voice still rang in her ears. "This is your chance to prove you're more than a one-hit feature. Lock this down and you're set for life." It should have been simple. The numbers printed in bold type were larger than anything she had ever imagined. Tours, label advances, guaranteed collaborations with names she'd admired since she was 12. But the sound of Graham's voice on the phone echoed just as loud. "Even if it means not with me." Her chest tightened. She pushed the pen away and let out a shaky breath. The apartment around her was dim, cluttered with empty mugs and crumpled lyric sheets. She'd been staring at the contract for hours, unable to cross the bridge it demanded of her. Because signing it meant leaving Graham in the dust. The next day, she dragged herself into the studio. Graham was already there, headphones crooked on his head, eyes fixed on the screen as waves of sound pulsed across it. He looked up and grinned, that same easy grin that made her knees weak. "Morning. You look like you lost a fight with your pillow." "I didn't sleep." "Too much on your mind?" She nodded, dropping her bag to the floor. "I got an offer from Neon Star Records. They want me to front a whole EP. They're pairing me with 3 different producers." His face flickered, but he masked it with a nod. "That's huge, Soph. You deserve it." The word deserve landed like a stone. She swallowed. "If I take it, I won't have time for us. For this." She gestured at the studio, the cables, the glowing board, the 2 of them. For a long moment, Graham didn't say anything. He just leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes fixed on her like he was studying every line of her face. Finally, he said, "Then you take it." "No hesitation. You've worked too hard to pass on this." Her voice cracked. "Why do you keep saying that? Why do you keep pushing me away?" His jaw tightened. He looked away. "Graham," she whispered. When his eyes finally met hers, they were darker than she'd ever seen. "Because if I tell you what I really want, I'm afraid you'll choose me over your future, and I can't be the reason you stay small." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Sophie's throat ached. "Do you know how much that hurts to hear?" she asked. "Do you know how much it hurts to say?" That night, Sophie sat cross-legged on her apartment floor, headphones on, looping the demo they'd made together. The beat rumbled, her voice soared, and somewhere in the middle, their laughter from a stray studio take slipped into the track. It wasn't perfect, but it was them. She thought of the years she'd spent chasing a sound that felt like home, the countless auditions, the empty contests. She'd been searching for herself in other people's songs. But here, with Graham, she'd found it. And suddenly she knew. The next morning, she showed up at the studio with the contract folder in her arms. Graham looked up, wary as she set it on the console. "You sign?" he asked. "No." His brows shot up. "I thought about it. Really thought about it. And maybe it makes sense on paper, maybe it's safer, maybe it's everything I thought I wanted 6 months ago, but I don't care about safe anymore. I care about this." She tapped the console. Then she tapped her chest. "I care about us." He stared, silent as if afraid to breathe. "I'm not walking away from what we built," she continued, voice firm. "Not when I know the best is still ahead of us. If I blow this chance, fine. Another one will come. But I'll never find another you." The air between them buzzed, alive and trembling. Finally, Graham pushed back from his chair and stood. Slowly, cautiously, he closed the space between them. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice low. Sophie's answer was immediate. "Yes." And before she could second-guess it, he reached for her. His hands framed her face, warm and steady, and then his lips were on hers. The kiss was tentative at first. A question, an apology, a release of everything they hadn't said. But when she kissed him back, fierce and unafraid, it deepened into something that felt like fire. Messy, unstoppable, alive. When they broke apart, breathless, Sophie laughed shakily. "Took you long enough." His forehead rested against hers. Worth the wait. They spent the rest of the day in a haze, half working, half lost in the gravity that pulled them together. The music flowed easier than ever, every note sharpened by the honesty between them. By evening, they had the skeleton of a new track. Bolder, raw, undeniable. This wasn't just another collaboration. It was their answer to the world. And Sophie knew deep down that whatever came next, festivals, charts, fame, she'd chosen right. That night, as she left the studio, her phone buzzed again. Another offer. Another number bigger than the last. She smiled, slid it into her pocket, and kept walking. Because for the first time, the choice was simple. Chapter 15. Electric Skies. The night their new single dropped, Sophie could barely breathe. The studio smelled faintly of stale coffee and warm circuitry, cables snaking like veins across the floor. The two of them sat shoulder to shoulder, laptop open, progress bar crawling across the screen as their song went live worldwide. "This is it," Graham whispered, eyes fixed on the upload window. Sophie nodded, clutching her knees to her chest. "Feels like we're about to jump off a cliff." He grinned sideways at her. "Then I guess we better learn how to fly." The notification chimed. Their song was out. For a moment, the world was still. Then the flood began. Likes, shares, comments, streaming numbers ticking upward like a rocket taking off. And somewhere in the noise, Sophie realized she wasn't scared anymore. The days that followed blurred into chaos. Playlists picked them up. Blogs wrote features. TikToks exploded with clips of Sophie's voice over Graham's beats, strangers dancing, crying, lip-syncing to words she'd written alone on her bedroom floor. Their name, Foster Soph, started trending. Mariah called again, her tone sharper this time. "Do you understand what's happening? You're sitting on a gold mine. This is bigger than the first single. People aren't just listening, they're obsessed." Sophie smiled. "I know. What's your plan? Tour? Merch? Radio interviews?" She looked at Graham across the room, headphones around his neck, messy hair sticking up like he'd fought the wind. He shot her a thumbs up and mouthed, "We're on fire." And Sophie said into the phone, steady and sure, "Our plan is to keep making music. Together." The announcement came a week later. Across social media, their feeds lit up with the same post. "We're officially a duo. Foster Soph, more music soon. Thank you for believing in us." The response was immediate and deafening. Fans dubbed them the perfect storm. His heavy drops, her soaring voice, a fusion that felt inevitable. They weren't just collaborators anymore. They were a name, a brand, a force. And for Sophie, it was more than career. It was home. Months passed in a whirlwind. Studio sessions bled into radio slots, photo shoots into rehearsals. Their second single climbed faster than the first, scraping the edges of the Billboard charts. Offers poured in, festivals, collabs, late-night TV, but nothing compared to the email that arrived one spring morning. Electric Daisy Carnival, Las Vegas, main stage slot. Sophie's hands shook as she read it out loud. Graham blinked, then whooped so loud the neighbors probably thought a murder was happening. He grabbed her, spun her in a circle, nearly knocking over the lamp. "We did it," he shouted. "We're playing EDC." She laughed until she couldn't breathe, tears in her eyes. "We actually made it." And then, 1 year later, the desert night thrummed with light and heat, the air thick with sweat and anticipation. Tens of thousands of people packed shoulder to shoulder, neon bracelets flickering like stars against the dark. The stage loomed massive, a cathedral of LED screens and pyrotechnics. Backstage, Sophie paced in circles, palms slick. "I think I'm gonna throw up," she muttered. Graham adjusted his headphones, smirking. "That's how you know it's real." She stopped, staring at him. His face was calm, steady, like it always was before the storm. And in that moment, the noise of the crowd, the glare of the lights, it all faded. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded. "With you? Always." They stepped out together. The roar that greeted them was unlike anything Sophie had ever felt. Deafening, physical, a tidal wave of sound that shook her to her bones. The first notes hit, Graham's beats crashing like thunder, and Sophie raised the mic to her lips. When she sang, the crowd erupted. Thousands of voices screamed the words back at her, strangers from every corner of the world united in the sound she once thought no one would ever hear. And as the chorus dropped, pyros exploding, Graham grinned at her across the stage. She grinned back, fire in her chest. Because this was it. This was the dream. The quiet girl from high school, the producer who never stopped chasing sound, two unlikely threads that had twisted into something unstoppable. And under the electric skies of Las Vegas, Sophie knew with absolute certainty. She had found her voice. She had found herself. And she had found him. Thanks for listening. Stay cozy, and I'll see you in the next story.